The Tennessee Titans need some depth on their defensive line. Here are some defensive free agents that could be fits for the Titans. We're going to discuss that and more on today's edition of the Locked On Titans podcast. Let's get it.
You are Locked On Titans, your daily Tennessee Titans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to the Locked On Titans podcast. I am your host, Tyler Rowland. Titans fans, we got to talk about some defensive free agents who could add depth for the Tennessee Titans before they go into training camp. We talked about some offensive free agents who can help the team, specifically at wide receiver and offensive line earlier in the week. Make sure you go back and check that out if you missed it. But talking defense today, we're going to start with the defensive line. Before we get into it, do want to thank you guys for making the Locked On Titans podcast your first listen every day. Remember, Monday through Friday, Tennessee Titans content all year round on all apps and always for free. Make sure that you get subscribed, stay subscribed to the Locked On Titans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. We're going to talk about some defensive free agents who could help the Titans today. Next week, we are going to continue our positional preview series heading towards training camp. We talked about all the offensive positions earlier. Check those out if you missed it. But we're going to do the defense, D-line, edge, linebacker, safety, corner. Going to break down the Titans roster at those positions next week. Make sure that you don't miss that again. Get subscribed, stay subscribed, throw a thumbs up on the video. If you're watching right now, definitely does help the channel out a lot. And let me know if you're an everydayer down below in the comments. Can't appreciate you guys enough. But moving into some defensive line help for the Tennessee Titans. I'm going to talk about the edge rushers first, because you look at the Titans edge rushing group. You have Harold Landry coming off a torn ACL. You think that you're going to get a good version of Harold Landry, but it's hard to know 100% positive. And then you have a guy like Arden Key, who you brought over as a free agent. And I like Arden Key. He had the second most pressures the last month of the season in the NFL behind Joey Bosa or Nick Bosa. So, you get them confused. They're brothers. But either way, Arden Key, I like what he can give you. But at the end of the day, the best parts of his career have been as a role player, as a third rusher coming off the bench, not as a starter. And then, of course, you have Rashad Weaver, who had 5.5 sacks last year, which was basically his rookie season due to the leg injury in his actual rookie year. But at the end of the day, Rashad Weaver was up and down. He lacks discipline at times. I don't know if he is an every down player either. So your number one starter is a guy coming off a torn ACL. You got two guys who have been rotational guys. I think the Titans could stand to use another veteran edge rusher. And you could look at Sam Okweanonu, who missed like all of the OTA work. You could look at Caleb Murphy or one of the undrafted free agent guys. But what are you really banking on there? What are you really betting on with that? To me, the Titans need to bring in another veteran as part of the pass rush group, not only to have more talent there, but to make sure they have enough depth, because they are one injury away from Landry or Key or Weaver to where they have a miserable edge rushing group. So I found some names who are still available in free agency. Most of them are older players, of course, who are available right now. That makes sense. But diving right in here, Melvin Ingram, 145 games in his career, 57 sacks. He had 6 sacks last year for the Dolphins. So in a rotational role, he can still be incredibly valuable. Not only that, but my number one option for the Titans is Kyle Van Noy. Van Noy is a versatile linebacker who can stand up a little bit. He can rush the passer. He's played in the New England scheme for a long time, had multiple stints there, which has to appeal to Mike Vrabel. He's a smart player who can be versatile. I think that's what the Titans need. 128 career games, 33 and a half sacks. He's had 5 sacks. Kyle Van Noy's had at least 5 sacks in 5 of the last 6 seasons. He may be an older player, but he hasn't slowed down. And out of those 6 seasons, the only season he didn't have 5 sacks was like 4 years ago, where he had 3.5. So he's had at least 5 sacks, 5 out of the last 6 years, and 3 straight. I think that Kyle Van Noy can still help this defense. He can be versatile, and in my opinion, he could be a direct backup for Harold Landry, because I don't think that Arden Key, who's more of a pass rusher, Rashad Weaver, who doesn't have the athleticism of a guy like Harold Landry, I don't think that the Titans have anybody right now who can mirror the skill set of a Harold Landry. And I think a guy like Kyle Van Noy could do that. Not exactly, but could do that. Another guy who the Titans could look at is Yannick Ngakoue. I mean, Ngakoue is just a sack professional. There's no other way around it. He's played in 110 games in his career, 65 sacks. That's the highest on the list of all these players. He's had 8 sacks every year. The last 2 years, he's had 19 and a half sacks. He had 10 sacks and then 9 and a half sacks in back-to-back years, and he's still a free agent. That tells you something, though. Yannick Ngakoue isn't the most well-liked player by coaches. Yannick Ngakoue isn't a guy who's going to give you a lot in run defense. He is a pure pass rusher. And if you have Weaver, who's a bigger-bodied guy, you have a physical player and a violent player like Arden Key, you have Harold Landry, who's obviously an every-down edge rusher. If you brought in a guy like Ngakoue, who is just purely a third-down rotational pass rusher, that could have some value. But I'll be honest with you, I don't think it's a great fit culture-wise with Yannick Ngakoue in the Titans. I don't think he's a Mike Vrabel guy, so I don't see that there. But the last guy I want to mention is Trey Flowers. 79 career games, 31 and a half sacks. He is slowing down, but he's another guy with versatility. He can play a little on the edge, maybe slide in and rush from the interior. Played, I think, 6 games with Detroit last year. Again, he is slowing down a little bit. He's probably my least liked option available here, but at the end of the day, he does make some sense as a guy who has scheme versatility and will be on the cheap. All these guys should be on the cheap at this point. On the actual interior defensive line, a guy like Matthew Ioannidis, Matthew Ioannidis, 6'3", 310. I think he could play in like the DeMarcus Walker type role where he's a defensive tackle, but he's a 5'3" D end at times. I think he could do that, play on the interior mostly. Michael Brockers is a guy who the Titans worked out earlier this offseason. 6'5", 300 pounds, pure defensive tackle at this point at 32 years old. He played 4 games in 2022, so a guy who's slowing down, kind of like Trey Flowers, but the Titans worked him out, so they're clearly interested. And then Carl Nassib could be an option for the Titans. 6'7", 275. He's a long, lengthy rusher. Can maybe back up Danico Autry. I'm not as high on those names, but Kyle Van Noy, Melvin Ingram, Matthew Ioannidis, I think these guys make a ton of sense for the Titans to take a look at from a depth standpoint on the defensive line. But we're going to move into the secondary because there are some guys at safety, some guys at cornerback who I think make a ton of sense for the Titans. Before we get into it, though, do want to let you guys know that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Take your first swing at betting MLB on FanDuel, and you can get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets up to $200. That's right. Just bet $20 and you'll land $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. That's $200 that you can spend betting everything from the money line to the over-under to who you think is going to hit the first home run. It's all on the FanDuel Sportsbook app, which is safe, secure, super easy to use. Plus, when you win, you can get paid instantly. There's no better place to bet on the MLB than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So sign up today and visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get up to $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball. Titans fans, let's continue today's edition of the Locked On Titans podcast, looking at some defensive free agents that could make some sense for the Titans. I just went over some guys at edge. I went over some guys on the interior D-line. Now I want to move into the secondary where I think the Titans could use some assistance as well, because you look at what the Titans have there. And again, like most of the spots, there's a lack of depth and they're one injury away from being in a really, really bad spot. Before we get into it, though, I do want to thank you guys for making the Locked On Titans podcast your first to listen every day, Monday through Friday, Tennessee Titans content all year round on all apps, always for free. It's your team every day here on the Locked On Titans podcast, so make sure that you get subscribed, stay subscribed. At cornerback, you got Sean Murphy-Bunting, addition, had some injury issues last year. You got Christian Fulton, missed 20 out of possible 50 games in his career. Those are your primary outside corners. Your other guy is Caleb Farley, who hasn't even been able to hit the practice field yet due to a back injury. And then outside of that, Trey Avery, some undrafted free agents. And in the slot, you have Roger McCreary. You have Elijah Molden, who's been cross-training as a safety, but Molden was out the majority of last year. McCreary may not be a slot corner. He may need to stay outside because he doesn't have the quickness to work on the inside. I think he does. But now you're counting on Molden to back him up. So I think the Titans could use some depth, and I think that they really need more depth on the outside. I think they need one more outside cornerback. But maybe they think they need some help on the interior. Maybe they think that they could have another slot guy in there because some of the undrafted free agents they brought in are purely slot options. So clearly they were looking at that spot. For me, you look on the outside, I think a guy like Marcus Peters makes a ton of sense. I've said it all along. I know that he's got a cantankerous personality, but I think that's what the Titans need. I think that defensive back group needs a little fire, needs a little aggression. I think Marcus Peters could make a ton of sense. He's a 3-time Pro Bowler. He's a 2-time All-Pro. Look, he may not be that level of player anymore, but he's still productive. He's still productive. He's had some good seasons. He had an injury in 2021, but he was productive last year. Played in 14 games, I think 13 games last year. So I think a sage old veteran like Marcus Peters, who is more of a role player, a depth piece, I think that can make a lot of sense. And then Ronald Darby. Ronald Darby played last year 5 games with Denver. He got hurt. But when he played those 5 games, quarterbacks had a completion percentage of 38% against him. Ronald Darby is much more of a slot guy, 5'9", but I still think that he can make a ton of sense for the Titans, or 5'11", my apologies, 5'11", but he can make a ton of sense for the Titans as a veteran. I mean, look, Elijah Molden's going into year 3. Roger McCreary is going into year 2. They're both still young players. You get a veteran like Ronald Darby, who you can beat, maybe even if you play McCreary, you play Molden on those early downs, Darby may be your late down option. So I just think Marcus Peters, I've liked Marcus Peters as an option for the Titans throughout the offseason. Ronald Darby could make some sense as well. But let's talk about safety. Because outside of Kevin Byard and Amani Hooker, Elijah Molden's cross-training there. But what in the world do the Titans have at safety? The Titans usually want 2 backup safeties, one guy who can actually play on defense, a dime safety who can play in dime personnel, third down packages, maybe a tight end stopper, all that. And then they want another safety who's going to primarily play on special teams. I think they're grooming Molden to be that third safety that can play on passing downs, but they still don't have a viable guy at safety who can be that special teams guy who maybe even could play in a pinch. And who knows if Molden is even good enough. We're all excited about that transition and Elijah Molden cross-training, but there's no guarantee that Elijah Molden is good enough to actually do that. So with that in mind, some safeties who would make sense for the Titans: Dane Cruikshank, Josh Kalu. Why not bring him back? Dane Cruikshank's best year of his entire career was with the Titans when he was used as a tight end stopper and dime. And then obviously he could be a gunner on special teams, personal protector, all that stuff on the coverage units. Why not bring back Dane Cruikshank? Similarly, Josh Kalu. These are guys who have had great moments on special teams for the Titans. If Molden is safety number 3 that actually play on dime, then you bring back one of these guys to be your special teams guy you can count on, better than Mike Brown or Shaheem Carter. And then if the Titans want a third safety who can actually play some defense, LaMarcus Joyner. Smaller guy, I know, but he played 14 games last year for the Jets and had 3 picks. He's a guy who makes plays on the ball. So I just think either of those options could make a ton of sense for the Titans, especially when you look at the depth concerns that they have at both spots. And again, we are in the middle of our positional preview series. I say we and are because you guys are a part of this. You know, it may be me doing the show alone, but you're a part of it. We're in the middle of our positional preview series, and we've talked about the offense. Next week, we're going to get into defense. So we're going to talk about cornerback, and we're going to talk about safety. And we go through those positions and look at what could really happen with one injury. The Titans have to add some veteran help at these positions. And it all comes back to this for me. If this is a last dance type season with Tannehill and Henry on the last year of their contracts, you better add some veterans at these spots that lack depth so that you give them a real chance to win games. Because you're a few injuries away at different spots from being in a very similar position as last year. And the veterans on this team are not going to be able to overcome it. Give them some veteran help. Okay, that's all I'm saying. That's all I'm saying. But we're going to talk about the linebackers because there are a couple of linebackers that have a specific role that I think the Titans should be paying attention to in free agency, even if I admit that linebacker is probably the least important position to be looking at for depth based on what the Titans did in free agency. But we'll get into all of that in just a moment. Titans fans, let's cap off today's edition and this week of the Locked On Titans podcast. We've talked about some free agent options for the Titans on the defensive line. We talked Melvin Ingram and Kyle Van Noy at edge, Matthew Ioannidis on the defensive line, maybe Michael Brockers. Talked about the defensive backs that could possibly help the Titans, guy like Marcus Peters or Ronald Darby at cornerback, Dan Cruikshank, Josh Kalu, LaMarcus Joyner at safety. I do want to talk about the inside linebackers next, but before we get into it, I do want to thank you guys for making the Locked On Titans podcast your first listen every day, Monday through Friday, Tennessee Titans content all year round on all platforms, always for free. Make sure you get subscribed, stay subscribed to the Locked On Titans podcast. It's your team every day. Shout out to my everydayers out there as well. Again, make sure you let me know down below if you're an everydayer. Can't tell you guys how much I appreciate you guys tuning in Monday through Friday, but looking at linebacker. To me, the Titans have a lot of linebackers who can help in run defense. Monty Rice, in my opinion, is better in run defense than pass coverage. Azeez Al-Shaair, better in run defense than pass coverage. Jack Gibbons, maybe not. Maybe the opposite way around, but I don't think he's so great in pass coverage that you would consider him a pass coverage linebacker. We don't know what to think about Chance Campbell. Ben Neiman, definitely more of a run-first guy. Luke Gifford, more of a run-first guy. These are more special teams options more than anything, but to me, what the Titans are missing is a true pass coverage linebacker, like a guy who can come in on third downs. You got Elijah Molden and this linebacker playing the linebacker spots with 5 defensive backs and 4 rushers, and that is your third down pass coverage package. Okay? Yeah, my nose is itching, boy. So a linebacker that fills that role for me, and I'll admit some bias here. I'll just admit it up front. I've liked this guy his entire career. And it's Anthony Barr. Okay, he gives you the ability to rush a little bit, but can play pass coverage. He's played in 112 games. He's got 18 and a half sacks and 5 interceptions. So versatility there. And I think that would appeal to Mike Vrabel. You could move him around. You could get creative with Anthony Barr and his ability to rush while also being a pass coverage guy. So I think that would make a ton of sense for the Titans. Another guy, and he's more of a special teams option than anything, but Kevin Pierre-Louis. Decent pass defender throughout his career, a little bit of an older player, but has experience in that realm. And then another name that I want to bring up here, it's a blast from the past. And maybe there's a falling out. There's a cultural situation with him and Mike Vrabel, so maybe it's not going to work out. But what about Jayon Brown? I mean, the Titans wanted Jayon to be a starter for a while. That clearly wasn't going to work out. Went to Vegas, didn't really work out. It's had some injuries. But if you're bringing him back on a minimum deal just to purely focus on being a pass coverage linebacker and a guy who helps on special teams, that could maybe make some sense. And I know that, I'm reaching in the bag here. Like I explained earlier, I don't think the Titans need a lot of depth at linebacker. I really don't. Again, if they do, it's just they don't have a guy who screams to me that he's a pass coverage specialist. So maybe it's more of a role, But, and I know people are going to bring up the safeties, but that's one dime safety. I'm already accounting for a dime safety who's going to play at linebacker depth on passing downs. You need a pure linebacker out there too, just in case they do run the ball, right? You'd like to have a balance. So to me, I don't think the Titans really need to focus on adding a linebacker like I do in the defensive backfield and on the defensive line. I would say linebacker is probably the least I'm worried about of all the positions because they added so much already. But yeah, maybe they would look at a guy who is a specialist in that one area. Doubtful, but those names would make sense. But outside of that, I don't really see a lot of names on the free agent market at a lot of positions that would really be helpful to the Titans at this point. That's the reality this late in the game, which is why it made it so hilarious that Mike Vrabel said after the draft that free agency isn't over and we can still sign people. Well, now that cut day only happens once and it's after the third preseason game, it's harder to bank on that. It's harder to churn your roster during training camp and get guys that get cut by other teams and bring them in and see how they do. It's just harder to do that. You have less time to do all of that. So I thought it was just ridiculous that Mike Vrabel fed us that nonsense when he was talking about the wide receiver position, but give me a break here, Mike, and that's why, again, to wrap this all up, that's why it's so important that they sign DeAndre Hopkins, because he is the only free agent out there right now who really will make a difference on this team. And it's at the biggest spot of need as well. So, but that is going to do it for me today, folks. Appreciate you guys hanging with me throughout this week. As always, I'm way off now. I'm way off on the timing. I'm going to be back next week to continue the positional breakdown. But as always, I am your host, Tyler Rowland, and this was Locked On Titans.